静音，不然的话会干扰这个音箱。
声音还挺好。那我们开始吗？好，直接开始吧。Okay, it's time. It's time to start. Marta, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Professor Marta Jimenez, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, dear friends, good evening and good morning. Today, I'm very excited to announce to you on behalf of our Department of Philosophy and the Institute of Foreign Philosophy that our Friday lecture series once again starts from this year. Friday lectures is one of our most lovable lecture series here. It has already constituted a crucial part of the tradition of our department. In the past decade also, many distinguished international voices in different philosophical areas and from different traditions, from different angles have been heard in the Friday lectures. Many prestigious philosophers communicated their fascinating ideas with us here. We have philosophers like David Charles, Christopher Shields, John Marenbaum in ancient and medieval philosophy, Anthias Kamelin, Robert Pippin, Carrie Pinkert, Jean-Peter Haussmann, Jürgen Stauffenberg, Heiner Kleiman in early modern philosophy and classic German philosophy. Dermot Moran, John Welton, the past Laszlo Tengbi, Hans-Helmut Gander, Dan Zahavi, Julia Janssen in phenomenology. Ernie Sosa, Ernie Laporte, the past Jerry Fodder, Michael Bradman, Jay Wallace, Michael Binney, John Hustle in analytic tradition, and many, many others. Unfortunately, we had to interrupt our Friday lectures since 2018 due to our major responsibilities for the organization of the 24th World Congress of Philosophy that year and the pandemic in the following years. As some of you may have already known, this year it is the 110th anniversary of our Department of Philosophy. For all of us, now it turns out to be the best occasion to resume our most favorable Friday lectures. With fabulous aid of my colleagues and friends, our Friday lectures finally come back. We are very proud to successfully invite 17 distinguished international philosophers to join us from many countries and different traditions online for the whole year of 2022. This year, all of our lectures are jointly supported by the Overseas Guest Lectures Program of International Office of Peking University, the Department of Philosophy, and the Institute of Foreign Philosophy. I deeply thank all our friends and all this institute for their irreplaceable and generous support and love. I also would like to thank you, all the respected audience, for your enthusiasm and devotion to our Friday lectures. Today, it is the first lecture in our Friday lecture series this year. We are very honored to have Professor Marta Jimenez from Emory University with us. She will share with us her extremely inspiring thoughts on anger and justice in Aristotle in the next 2 hours. Now, before her talk, please allow me to invite Professor Cheng Wei from Peking University to introduce Professor Jimenez to all of you. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, and I'd like to thank Professor Jimenez. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Professor Jimenez briefly. She got her PhD from University of Toronto. Now she's working at the philosophy department of Emory University. She is a leading expert in ancient Greek philosophy with an emphasis on ethics and political philosophy. In addition, she's also working in moral psychology and social ethnology, ancient and contemporary. She has published many articles in the leading journals such as Phonesis and the History of Journal of History of Philosophy. In 2020, she has published her monograph, Aristotle on Shame and Learning to be Good in Oxford University Press, a book which I highly recommend. So today she will give us a talk entitled Aristotle on Anger and Justice, a topic which I think is not only historically relevant, but also important for us to reflect on today's reality. So please join me in welcoming Professor Jimenez.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very nice introduction. And thank you, Professor Cheng, for inviting me to be part of this very nice and exciting lecture series. And it's an honor to be the first one to restart the Friday lectures. And I'm thankful to also to the Department of Philosophy of Peking University for having me here. I'm excited to present some stuff that I've been working on and see and talk about the topic with all of you and get into a conversation about Aristotle on anger and justice. So this is a paper that is in progress, and it is the beginning of the beginning is part of a research of a project on Aristotle on justice in general, and I work a lot more. Like I have done work, and I'd like to do work on emotions, as Professor Cheng was saying. My last big project was on shame, and now my big new project is on justice. But because I like to look at the emotions that relate to questions of ethics and politics, the emotion of anger turns out to be a very important one in relation to justice in Aristotle, I think. And that's what this paper is about. So, and Aristotle does have a position that is maybe contrary to some recent views on the role of anger in politics, but also it is in line with even more recent views that are claiming a space for this emotion in our political life. So I have a PowerPoint presentation and I have a handout. I'm going to the handout is also shared in the chat for those who are listening from home, and I'm going to upload it in the chat again so that because those who maybe came a little later have access to it too. Here. I think that's some version of the draft of the paper, which is still a draft, was shared earlier with you. And I'm going to have a PowerPoint presentation so that you have something to entertain yourselves while I'm just presenting the ideas. Okay, let me find it. Here it is. Share and slideshow from current slide. There you go. Okay, good. So the paper topic is Aristotle on anger and justice, and the question that I'm asking is whether anger can play a positive role in our struggle for political change. And in contemporary discussions, we have a large range of positions, just as we had in ancient discussion. So Martha Nussbaum, that is the first one in that picture, rejects totally anger as an emotion that can have any positive role in our political lives. Then we have people like Daniel Allen that holds an intermediate position, and other authors like Sarah Ahmed or Misha Sherry that have defended lately a positive space for anger in the political sphere. In the ancient times, we had a similar range of positions. So from the Stoics, and that's a painting of Seneca there. Seneca is famous for writing against anger in different contexts. So in the era or in the Medea, he portrays anger as a very destructive emotion. Plato has, and that's part of what I am going to point out today, or just bring up today. Plato has an intermediate position, so he is going to preserve some space for anger, but is going to just resist to some of the features of anger that he does consider to be destructive or negative. And then Aristotle, as I'm going to discuss today, Aristotle has a positive view of anger, and he does think that anger is appropriate in some cases, and does have a positive role in our ethical and political lives. So in this paper, I'm going to argue that Aristotle sees anger and concretely retributive or retaliatory anger as an emotion that is indispensable to respond adequately to injustice and abuse, insofar as it prepares us to make others properly accountable for their actions when they have wronged us. So just as the ancient Stoics, Martha Nussbaum, in her Anger and Forgiveness, emphasizes the destructiveness of anger and makes a case in favor of a strong commitment to non-anger. Nussbaum underscores how non-anger has been the guiding spirit of some of the most important recent revolutions, and argues that anger is not a good model for social change. Nussbaum specifically emphasizes that in antiquity, Aeschylus and Plato were already aware of the dangers of anger and make big efforts to eliminate it from Athens' political sphere. And that in modern times, some of the most popular revolutionary heroes of the 20th century, and she cites Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, they actively avoided seeking for revenge or retaliation, or in her terms, payback. Instead, she argues, they operated a transition from anger and vindictiveness to other more constructive emotions and attitudes such as compassionate hope and loving generosity. So in her terms, they move from punitive spirit to a generous one. I'm not convinced by Nussbaum's conclusions, both on the nonviolent revolutionary leaders she cites and on Plato. After all, King is the one who said that a riot is the language of the unheard. And this is a quote from King here. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last 12 or 15 years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. So I wanted to read the quote as a whole. The famous part of the quote is that justice is, that a riot is the language of the unheard. But part of what King is connecting here and making the link here is between the anger that people feel and the injustice that they're suffering, and like the reaction against the injustice as the anger reaction of injustice as a call of attention to those who are not able to hear the message in a different way. So as I see it, in the case of the three revolutionaries, like the three activists that Nussbaum mentions, although the three of them are clearly the dangers of uncontrolled anger, they never claimed to seek the elimination of anger. Instead, they sought in various ways to turn the force of both individual and collective anger into positive change. So that's what I'm terming the transformation or rechanneling of anger for social change. And it's not an elimination of the emotion, but rather a transformation of it. Here they have another quote from Martin Luther King where he says, the supreme task of a leader is to organize and unite people so that their anger becomes a transforming force. And here you see that like King is seeing anger as something that can be positive and that can be something that moves them towards positive change. In other words, they rechanneled, transform, or control the anger instead of eliminating it or substituting it with a different emotion, as Nussbaum was suggesting. And similarly, in the case of Plato also holds an intermediate position in relation to anger. So although like Nussbaum characterizes Plato as eliminating it, but he criticizes the and rejects retaliatory anger. He does not get rid of anger altogether, but instead proposes what I call a reformative model of anger, focus on the transformation and betterment of the offender rather than on the satisfaction of the offended. So that term, reformative model or reformative anger, is one that Daniel Allen uses in order to characterize Plato's move. And I think that signals one of the main differences between the way in which Plato's taking the role of anger and what Aristotle is going to do instead. Here, wait. So the problem with anger, Aristotle does instead have a defense of retributive anger against the previous two positions. And problem with anger for both those that are inclined to deny its potential positive role in our ethical and political lives and in those who prefer to rechannel it or transform it is its connection to revenge or retaliation. A connection that goes back to this definition of anger that you have here from Aristotle's Rhetoric, where he defines anger as a desire accompanied by pain for a perceived revenge on account of perceived slight at the hands of someone who has no call to slight oneself or one's friends. But the part that I want to emphasize is that connection with revenge there. The problem, as the critics of anger see it, is that revenge seems too destructive, reactive, and negative, and does not seem to offer a true solution to the offense that it reacts against. In contrast to those positions, and in line with contemporary views such as those of Bell Hooks and Sarah Ahmed and Misha Sherry, Aristotle here, revenge is the problem. This is the guy we have here, Achilles revenging. So contemporary views such as those of Sarah Ahmed, Bell Hooks, Misha Sherry, Aristotle also not only claims that the desire for a conspicuous revenge is at the heart of anger, but he also holds against Plato that such a desire is sometimes appropriate and rooted in the agent's orientation towards justice. So in the later sections of this paper, I'm going to explore some of Aristotle's reasons to maintain a positive role for retributive anger in his ethical and political thought. And I show that at least in political contexts, it is precisely the connection between anger and justice that makes sometimes appropriate seeking the kind of retaliation that anger aims at. As I argue, Aristotle has good reasons to resort to retributive anger as a response to injustice and oppression in cases where those who wrong us or oppress us do not leave a space for an adequate expression of our voices. So let's have a look first. So this is wait a minute before we go there. In this slide, I make explicit the connection that I think that makes Aristotle's view different and the reason why he differs from the Platonic position. So I think that Aristotle maintains retaliation as a crucial element of proper anger because of other of his fundamental theoretical commitments. And the two that I'm going to emphasize today are just like this role that external goods play in the good life for him, so that Aristotle is going to put more weight in his discussion of the good life to the role of external goods, and that connected to with his connection of justice as a quality that is always connected to questions about distribution, even if it is not reductible to that. And he understands justice more expansively, but like the notion of distribution is very central to it too. And for that reason, Aristotle, I think, holds a different attitude about the kind of weight that anger has or anger puts in our reactions to questions about fail or maintaining balance in the distribution of external goods or in the distribution of recognition. So let's go first to look at Plato's, very quickly, this is the short section of Plato's reformative anger, the reformative model. In this reading of what Plato is doing, I follow and I agree with most of what Daniel Allen has to say in relation to that. I've been persuaded that Plato does want to make an important intervention in the treatment of anger, and he wants to get rid of the retaliatory aspect. So anger played an important role in the political life of Athens in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. And as Daniel Allen writes, many intellectuals of the time found the constancy of violent retaliation and the payback spirit to be damaging for ethical and political life, leading some authors like Plato and Aeschylus to propose ways of stopping the cycles of anger and revenge. Plato knows better than anyone that excessive anger and wrongly directed anger can be dangerous, both at the personal and political levels. In fact, one of the clearest examples of bad anger in Plato is the anger directed at Socrates by his accusers, old and new, which was key both in bringing him to trial and prejudicing the jury against him. So the anger against Socrates is mentioned in the Euthyphro and is mentioned in the Apology, and he plays an important role in motivating and in just like supporting the explanations that Socrates gives to the reasons why he has been brought to trial. However, as I aim to show here, Plato does not get rid of anger altogether, despite the fact that he sees the dangers of it. He proposes instead a reformative model where the goal is not retaliation, but the transformation of the other or even the self who has committed the offense. So, as Allen argues, many of Plato's proposals aim at revising Athenian conceptions of punishment and substituting the retaliatory approach with a reformative one. Her conclusion, and this is why Nussbaum likes it, is that Plato is eliminating anger and focusing on more positive strategies and attitudes to procure justice, eliminating retribution, the attitude of the spirit of retribution that Nussbaum refers to. This Platonic move, as Allen notes, is grounded on Socrates' famous claim that no one does wrong knowingly. So in the Platonic dialogues, in dialogues such as the Protagoras, for example, we do have clear hints and even arguments that are put both in the mouth of Protagoras and Socrates about the inadequacy of punishment or retaliatory punishment in cases of wrongdoing where the problem is that the wrongdoer is ignorant. Just because Socrates claims that no one does wrong knowingly, if wrongdoing is the result of ignorance, then as I have here in the quote from Allen, the aim of punishment is to deal with the problem of ignorance, and this ignorance that causes wrongdoing through education of the wrongdoer about what is truly good to do, instead of through retribution. Punishment should arise not from anger at the wrongdoer, but from concern for the wrongdoer and the state of her soul, his or her soul. So the idea is that if Socrates is right and no one does wrong willingly and no one does wrong knowingly, then if the cause of doing wrong is ignorance, punishment makes no sense and the strategy should be teaching instead. She summarizes Plato's position in the way in which it is expressed in this quotation, and her analysis shows, however, that even if Plato is rejecting the retributive anger, this does not require rejecting anger altogether, but rather embracing this new model of anger that I've been labeling the reformative anger, one that is in charge of the task of reforming instead of punishing those who are morally wrong. In general, for Plato, the right reaction to both wrongdoing and moral disagreement is one of repairing rather than retaliating. And often he attributes to anger that reparative job. So there is a very interesting passage, for example, in the Sophist, where the stranger is trying to describe what the right reaction to being refuted is. And he says, well, some people, when they're being refuted, they get angry. But if the person guiding the elencos, the person guiding the interrogation does it properly, then they should guide the person who is being asked, the person who is being interrogated, to turn that anger in a mild way towards themselves for their own ignorance. So that like the anger the anger as it shows up in the Sophist, for example, is one that is not directed towards others and destructive, but rather is kind of like turned towards oneself and constructive in the sense of like being, we could say, being annoyed about one's own ignorance and wanting to repair it. So Plato then sees significant problems with the spirit of retaliation, proposes instead a transition towards the spirit of social and self-reform. Plato, however, does not see the need of replacing anger altogether, as I've seen, to promote that spirit. And he holds this intermediate position where only certain kinds of anger are seen as potentially positive. So this is a summary of the Platonic position, that it contains more complexities than this. And one example that someone might ask at some point is in Q&A maybe is about what happens, for example, at the end of the Statesman. The Statesman, where Plato talks about how the role of the good politician is to be able to weave anger and moderation together in the population, so that they are not too mild, but they're not too wild. And in that passage, at least, or in that context of the Statesman, anger seems to have had like a stronger positive role of kind of like making the citizens not too mild, so that they will react against the offenses or abuses. And that is one place in which we can see Plato defending a space for, or presenting a space for anger that is more in sympathy or closer to what I think that is happening in Aristotle. So Plato seems to be rejecting retaliatory anger. Aristotle seems to be wanting to preserve it. What is retaliatory anger for? This is what the second section of the paper I'm going to discuss. My question is, if Plato already sees the dangers of retaliatory anger and warns us against them, why then does Aristotle keep the language of retaliation in his normative treatment too? So in other words, does Aristotle just simply and critically keep hold of a traditional retaliatory anger, simply ignoring the Platonic criticisms, or there is some like real reason, robust reason why he wants to preserve retaliation at the heart of anger? We could try to read Aristotle as simply describing the connection between anger and retaliation in his definition of the rhetoric, and claim that he nonetheless does not think it is an appropriate emotion. And I think that this is a thought that Nussbaum flirts with in her book sometimes. And it is, maybe it's tempting because of the character of the rhetoric, that it's not normative but descriptive, in the sense that like the rhetoric is supposed to be giving us a characterization of different emotions without making value judgments about them. But I think there's something more than that. Concretely, I think that Aristotle holds that there's something important and worth preserving in the feeling that pushes agents to use retaliation to fix injustice and punish abuse, or greed? So these questions require some speculation because Aristotle does not deal directly with Plato's treatment of anger. He does not respond directly to it. And because with the exception of the texts from the Nicomachean Ethics, he treats anger and good temper in 4.5, and he also talks about it in 5.8 briefly, and then Eudemian Ethics 3.3. But most of the contexts where Aristotle discusses anger beyond those are not normative, but they are the main texts come from the rhetoric that is a little bit slippery in that regard. But I think that if we look at, and this is the proposal, the kind of like the move, the original move that I'm making in this paper, to look at what Aristotle says about the motives of revolution in Politics 5, in order to see some connections between the treatment of the motives of revolution and the motives of anger that are very much parallel in the terminology and in the way in which he describes them. And then see the connection that those motives have with questions about equality and justice, so that in that way we can just make some inferences about the ways in which Aristotle might think that anger is connected to a desire for equality and justice. Okay, so is this like in your handout at the bottom of page 1? I'm going to start looking at like going relatively quickly to look at some of the texts that that we find in Nicomachean Ethics, the rhetoric and the politics, and establish some connections between them. So in the Nicomachean Ethics 5, in the treatment of good temper, Aristotle, although Aristotle considers that the good-tempered person is not vengeful, but inclined to sympathetic understanding, as Martinus one translates it, he clearly states that anger is occasionally appropriate and may even sometimes offer the best response. So the Nicomachean Ethics, which is clearly like he's talking about a virtue. The person with good temper, the virtuous person, will be angry sometimes. And the is the right moment and the right reason, and in relation to the right person, occasion to be angry. He, in fact, just like makes that claim that the good-tempered person will be angry in the manner and at the things and for the length of time that reason dictates. And he contrasts that with the person who puts up with abuse and disrespect without getting angry, which he calls servile or slavish. The Greek word is andrapododes, and it has that connotation of being it's spineless and just like getting people to just like allow people to push one instead of reacting against the pushing. So that is not only can anger be felt adequately, but lack of anger may be associated with slavishness and the inability to properly defend oneself. Moreover, and that text is not in the slides, but I think that is in your handout, in the handout that I posted. In Nicomachean Ethics 5.8, Aristotle makes a connection between anger and injustice. This is the treatment of it's in the context of the treatment of themos. Like he's talking about themos, but nonetheless, the term that he uses is orge, that is the proper term for anger. And he says that it is perceived injustice that occasions anger. So here there is an explicit formulation of the connection between anger and the perception of an injustice occurring. Okay, So beyond the context of the Nicomachean Ethics, the discussion of anger in Rhetoric 2.2 and in Politics 5.1.2 offers support for the claim that Aristotle sees a strong connection between anger and a sense of justice. First, the examples in Rhetoric 2.2 confirm that is the discussion of anger in the rhetoric. Those examples that he gives there, confirm that anger is a reaction against abuses regarding questions of distribution and recognition, and that angry people aim at repairing these kinds of violations and restoring balance in situations that feel uneven to them. Moreover, what is even more interesting for our purposes is that the list of motives that Aristotle gives in the rhetoric, the motives of anger, overlap and kind of like correspond very nicely with the motives for revolution, stasis, that he gives in Politics 5.1.2 at the beginning of Politics 5, which he in turn links very clearly to desire for equality and desire for justice. I think that by comparing and putting in connection these two sets of passages from the rhetoric and the politics, we can get a sense of the political relevance of anger. Aristotle seeks to maintain, I think, the retributive side of anger because it is the aspect that best reflects anger, distinct connection with justice and with questions about fair distribution. So by connecting these two sets of texts, we can get more clarity on the connection between anger and justice. And he finds examples of appropriate retributive anger in those cases where the agent aims at restoring equality and the kind of social balance that can avoid the abuse and oppression that what he calls servile individuals end up being subject to. It is good for people to be mild and moderate, but not so mild that the result is that others take advantage of them or of others like them. And appropriate anger protects them from that risk. So the move that he's making there then is in the context of even the Nicomachean Ethics 4.5, the idea, like, because he's just like presenting the right kind of anger as something that is between like the excessive anger and the slavishness, he's referring to a balance very similar to the one that I was mentioning before that Plato talks about in the discussion at the end of the Statesman, that is this like weaving together the wildness and the mildness to get some kind of just like a balance between those two things. But he would agree with the Platonic verdict that without weaving the anger through, the citizens might end up being too mild and not able to respond to aggression properly. Okay, so let's go back to the definition of anger and pay attention to the two main things that I wanted to highlight for you. So as we read before, the definition of anger is a desire accompanied by pain for a perceived revenge on account of a perceived slight at the hands of someone who has no call to slight oneself or one's friends. In this definition, there are these two relevant points for our purposes. On the one hand, as noted before, that anger is intimately associated with revenge. This is what people find problematic in the strong conception of anger in Aristotle. And the other one is that the starting point of anger is what he calls here perceived revenge. So anger moves agents to seek revenge or reparation because of a perceived slight. As the example in the chapter suggests, the slights are mostly due to a failure of compensation or recognition. So that, I think that is relevant because it brings out like, what is it that the person with anger is paying attention in the events or in the situation that moves into anger. So those who are angry, those who get angry are provoked by the actions and words of others who in their eyes do not respect the proper distribution of material goods or recognition. The examples include cases of contempt, kataphronesis, spite, eperiasmus, and insolence, hubris, and they all have in common the existence of a lack of balance that the agent feels the need to fix. So it is just like something like the desire to get equal or something like that. Concretely, as the rest of the discussion in 2.2 clarifies, in all cases, the origin of anger is always explainable in terms of a perceived lack of balance, of fairness, or it's a perceived lack of balance or lack of fairness in the distribution or recognition of material goods, those who Aristotle sometimes calls the competitive goods. The agent, the angry agent, responds to the slight by somehow attempting to get even with the perpetrator and longs for the pleasure that the restored situation will bring. So in the passages from Politics 5 that I wanted to highlight for you, just like bring in connection with the discussion of anger, Aristotle studies the phenomenon of stasis, of revolution, faction, and includes under this notion all sorts of conflicts that can threaten the constitution. In Politics 5.1, Aristotle claims that all cases of political faction or revolution have a strong unifying source in that those who exercise stasis are seeking equality. So these like the looking for equality, the seeking equality is at the center of all the cases of stasis. The rest of the discussion of stasis in Politics 5 reveals that this desire for equality that Aristotle mentions here is parallel to the desire for restoration of balance that we have seen in the examples of anger. Of course, that's what I want to establish. In all these cases, the agents are seeking to repair what they take to be failures of distribution of goods of fortune, or to punish those who show graspingness, and the term there is pleonexia, greed, or are making unfair gains. So that is, again, a place in which a strong connection with justice shows up, because of the very central role that pleonexia plays in the definition or in the treatment of justice in the Nicomachean Ethics 5. So one of the, or like kind of like the main enemy of justice understood in the distributive sense is going to be graspingness, or this like desire to have more. And here in the discussion of the sources of stasis, we do have similarly like a connection between that kind of like the desire for equality and the reaction against anything that is perceived as an attempt to have more on the side of others. Moreover, in the Politics 5.2, Aristotle reiterates the idea that the ultimate cause of revolution is desire for equality, and that more generally, people engage in revolution when they think that an error has occurred in the distribution of material goods. Again, it is entering the competitive goods. So here the text in the slide that you also have in the handout, the universal and chief cause of this revolutionary feeling has been already mentioned. It is the desire for equality. When people think that they are equal to others who have more than themselves, or again, the desire for inequality and superiority when conceiving themselves to be superior. They think that they have not more, but the same or less than the inferiors. So pretentious, which may or may not be just. It is about the perception of injustice, and the perception of justice is like when the agent has the impression that one of these things that ought to be balanced are violated, they react against it. So finally, in Politics 5.2, the motives of revolution are always linked to either questions of distribution of material goods or questions about recognition. So either about gain or loss, or about honor and dishonor. In this text, that you also have in the handout, the goals and counter goals that provoke revolutions are gain and honor. So those are the positive ones on the one hand, and dishonor and loss on the other. For the authors of revolutions typically want to avoid loss and dishonors from themselves and their friends. As Aristotle observes, these motives operate in a way that do not need to be related, and this is interesting. They do not need to be related to one's own personal situation, but often are stirred by the unjust behavior of others. So even if the unjust behavior of others is not affecting one directly, one might be motivated to react against what is perceived pleonexia on the side of others. So this text is not it's not on the slide, but it's in your handout. People often are stirred up against one another by gain and by honor, not in order to acquire them for themselves, as was said earlier, but because they see other people grasping, being greedy, pleonectic, whether justly or unjustly with respect to these things. In sum, just as anger is a reaction to other people's abuses in relation to questions of recognition and distribution, what we learn from Politics 5, the first sections of Politics 5, is that revolution is a reaction to other citizens' pleonexia or graspingness about material goods and social status, or what is seen as such. And ultimately, it is a reaction against injustice. So, the point that I want to establish, that is the what I discuss in the part of the paper that comes, is that this discussion of the motives of revolution in the beginning of Politics 5 has so much in common, and I've been just marking some of the parallels with the motives of anger that he discusses in the rhetoric, and he uses even very much like a lot of the similar terminology. So, in this next section, about the parallels of the motives of revolution and the motives of anger, this passage from 5.2 brings up some of the terminology. So all the causes of revolution, this is still a text from the Politics, are insolence, hubris. As you remember, that was one of the main causes for anger. Fear, superiority, contempt, another one of the main causes for anger, disproportionate growth. Causes of still another sort are intrigue, slight, that here appears as a subcategory, and in the rhetoric was the big category of motives for anger, a slight that included hubris and contempt, pettiness, or dissimilarity. It is a little bit of a terminological mess, because it doesn't seem that the correspondences between the terms and the way in which they are grouped is stable between the rhetoric and the politics. But nonetheless, what is clear is that the constellation of examples and terms that are being used here and there are parallel and similar. And the reasons that Socrates gives for these phenomena being causes of anger are also parallel and similar in the rhetoric and in the politics. Aristotle includes in this list different emotions and tendencies that can be traced back to the general causes of anger in different ways, and that ultimately conflicts about status and distributions of material goods in both places. Rhetoric 2.2 offers relevant evidence in support of the close relationship between some of these motives of revolution. Three of the terms, as I was saying, that appear in this list figure explicitly and prominently in the discussion of anger. On the one hand, slight, which is the central cause of anger and desire for revenge. On the other hand, insolence, hubris, and contempt, kataphronesis, which are characterized as two of the three main kinds of the slight in the rhetoric. Moreover, superiority is directly linked to insolence in several passages in the rhetoric. And one important kind of insolence is dishonor, atimia. Moreover, although the terms are not directly used, there is also an indirect description of cases of intrigue, pettiness, and dissimilarity as causes of anger. So, in sum, there is a parallelism between the passages that I think allows us to just like use the discussion about the Stasis discussion about the revolution as and the more clear connection that Aristotle establishes is there with the desire for equality and justice, to throw some light on the ways in which he interprets how these motives also are like connected to desire for equality and justice in the case of anger. So a final text that you might find interesting and is relevant for the discussion of anger and throw some light on the connection with justice is this text from Politics 7. In the discussion of themos in Politics 7.7, which is going to be the final text that we use in order to make this connection between anger and the motives of revolution. Here, Aristotle's praise of themos as a crucial possession in the citizens of the best constitution shows the importance that he places upon having the emotional resources necessary to react against abuse, even and particularly when the abuse is done by our fellow citizens and our friends. In this passage, Aristotle offers a brief discussion of the character of the citizens of the ideal state in general and establishes that themos, that is traditionally translated as spirit or passion, sometimes anger too, is an important part of their natural emotional repertoire. Indeed, he analyzes this emotion as responsible for both bonding citizens and a stern internal conflict between them. His explanation goes back to the old attitude of being friendly towards one's friends and fierce toward one's enemies. And he claims that a good themos is a crucial factor in producing ideal citizens, because not only does it establish bonds of love, but it also can be the initiator of internal conflict. So again, this passage brings up some resonances with the passage from the Plato's Statesman that I was referring to before, where Plato talks about the relevance of having both anger and moderation weaved together. So here, the role that is played by themos is similar to that, and it resonates with some of the things that he says about anger in other places. So let me read the passage. Even if it is a little long, it might help us to just bring up some interesting things. Clearly, those whom the legislator will most easily lead to excellence may be expected to be both intelligent and courageous. Some say that the guardians should be friendly towards those whom they know, fierce towards those whom they don't know. Now, that is Plato. Now, themos is the quality of the soul which begets friendship and enables us to love. Notably, the spirit within us is more stirred against our friends and acquaintances than against those who are unknown to us, when we think that we are despised by them. The power of command and the love of freedom are in all people based on this quality, themos. For passion of themos is commanding and invincible. Nor is it right to say that the guardians should be fierce towards those whom they do not know, for we ought not to be out of temper with anyone. And a lofty spirit is not fierce by nature, but only when excited against evildoers. So again, here there is this kind of like emphasis on just like there are occasions in which it is appropriate, when excited against evildoers, it is appropriate to be fierce. And this, as I was saying before, is a feeling which people show most strongly towards their friends if they think they have received a wrong at their hands. So there is this connection with thinking that one has been wronged and being justified and reacting in a thimoidetic way, like in an angry manner. as indeed is reasonable. For besides the actual injury, they seem to be deprived of a benefit by those who owe them one. So here Aristotle identifies anger, thymos, in this case, is not orge, but is thymos, as what enables us to rule over others and to value our own independence. At the same time, he directly connects thymos with faction and takes this emotion to be a clear motivator for our reactions against those who have wronged us, and particularly against those among our friends and our fellow citizens who abuse us in some way. These points are important for our purposes. Sorry. Because these points are important for our purposes because they provide not only a clear connection between anger and the motives of revolution, but also a link between the emotion that bonds us to other people and the one that makes us react against those who wrong us. Moreover, this point about thymos offers support for my general hypothesis that Aristotle preserves a space for retaliatory anger as a positive emotion in his account of the good citizen, and considers that it plays an important social function. So, just to conclude, with these texts and these connections that I have established between the text from the rhetoric and the politics, trying to bring out and give some more content to the theme discussion we get in the Nicomachean Ethics, that is the central normative one that we have. By connecting this texts about the motives of anger and the motives of revolution, I wanted to support the claim that he sees anger as a relevant political emotion that can play an important positive role. It is particularly interesting that in both cases, in the case of anger and revolution stasis, there is a concern with equality and an intention to repair a lack of balance in the distribution of gain or honor. I think there are two main reasons why Aristotle does not adopt the Platonic rejection of retaliatory anger and keeps instead retaliation at the central element of his thought on ethical and political questions related to political disputes. Here, I think that this is the end of my slide. So I'm going to stop sharing and see everybody, how everybody is doing. And just read the final conclusion. That is like the final section in your handout too. I have a kind of little summary there. So first, Aristotle's position concerning the value of external goods or goods of fortune in the good life makes a difference for his view that makes a difference for his views on the value of retributive anger, I think. The spirit of retaliation reflects on a concern with the value of external goods that is in line with Aristotle's view that these goods do in fact make a difference in the good life. Only for someone who considers that external goods are relevant, such as Aristotle, does it become A, important to pay attention to questions about the proper distribution of those goods, and B, reasonable to consider failures to respect proper distribution as cases of harm that need to be repaired. Second, the spirit of retaliation reflects a particular approach to justice and highlights the connection between questions about distribution, questions about recognition, and questions about the social bonds that tie us to one another. Aristotle's notion of justice reflects his concern with questions about the goods of fortune in a way that Plato's does not. And that in turn leads him to adopt a different position in relation to anger. While the Platonic vision of justice is conceived mainly in terms of inner harmony between the parts of soul and the balance between our appetites, our passions, and reasons, and there is a more like an internal harmony concern. For Aristotle, a crucial aspect of justice deals with equality in the proper distribution of the goods of fortune. Justice regulates not only the exercise of the virtuous disposition in general, but also questions about the fair distribution of competitive goods. And that is the discussion in the Nicomachean Ethics, book 5. It moves in that direction. That is puzzling. Like there's a very big focus on the questions about distribution that I'm still struggling with, because the one was expecting Aristotle to go in a more expansive direction, but I find it interesting. For him, then, cases of abuse and greed cannot be resolved through the mere moral reform of the other, like in Plato's delusion with the reformative anger. And one's own awareness of the inferior value of external goods is not enough. An important part of the exercise of justice must include retaliation, I would say, or reparation, maybe, so that doesn't sound so strong, in the sense of compensation for harms and losses. And appropriate anger aims at that compensation and the pleasure that accompanies it. So against Nussbaum's and Seneca's proposal of an elimination of anger, then Aristotle has good reasons to hold that this emotion is not the wrong path towards political change. Moreover, he has good reasons to maintain the retributive aspect of anger against the Platonic reformative model. When we are dealing with cases of excessive greed or lack of respect or recognition, Aristotle thinks that reformative anger is insufficient and even irrelevant. For him, there is important value in retaliatory anger, particularly in the context of political injustice, because this kind of anger aims at solving issues concerning redistribution of material goods and the restoration of the kind of equality that makes life in community possible. Thank you. So that's my conclusion. And just to relax the space a little bit after I've been talking to you for almost an hour. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to share this video, but I wanted to show you a video of one of Franz de Waal's experiments with capuchin monkeys, where he sees how the capuchin monkeys get angry when there is a failure of distribution, and there is the connection that I claim that Aristotle is establishing in his texts between the perception of injustice and the perception of a lack of proper distribution, and the angry reaction on the capuchin monkey is what precisely the anthropologist Franz de Waal takes as a sign of the fact that the monkeys do have a sense of morality. So it is interesting that that you see these anthropologists making the backward argument that I'm making in relation to Aristotle, that it's just if the monkey reacts like this because of the improper distribution, that is a sign of the fact that he's perceiving some sort of a moral situation that he's reacting against. Let me see if I can share that, and then I will conclude. Let me see, where is the video? Oh, here. Okay, share. No, I want to share this one. Can you see the Franz de Waal video? Yes. Okay. Here it goes. It's 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
We can't hear the voice.
Is the voice is not working?
No.
No.
Oh, oh no. How do I do this? Okay, let me see. Speakers, same system. I'm not gonna know how to do it. Okay. Well, I can narrate. I can just show the video, and maybe you hear me while I play the video. That would be fine enough. I'll do the narration myself. So this is an experiment that he did. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So this is an experiment that he did with capuchin monkeys to show how they reacted to a situation of injustice. And they did the experiment with many of the animals, but it's very simple. It is an experiment in which, like, what the monkeys receive different things, and when the monkeys, one receives a cucumber and the other one they give it a grape. And when the grape is the preferred one, so when the one that gets the cucumber sees that for the same task the other one gets a grape, he gets very angry. And that is the kind of thing that Franz de Waal takes as a sign of the fact that the monkey has a sense of justice. So here is going to, you're going to see the image in a minute. And even without sound, I think that is going to be funny and illustrative. Wait a second. Come on, where is it? It's coming. Okay, here it goes. Now, so the first, why is it not working? The first, it just go frozen. All right. Okay, the first, they give it the stone, and he just gives out the stone and gets a cucumber. The other one gives back the stone. He has to give back the stone, and now he gets a grape. And the other one sees that he gets a grape. Now he gets the stone, and she gives him a cucumber for the stone, and he's just like, wait a minute. And he throws it, and he gets angry. He's just like, wait a minute, what's this? What's happening? Yeah, and then the other one gives the stone and gets a grape, and look at the reaction. Look at it. It's just like, I can't believe this. It tests the stone to see that it works. Okay, yeah, it's a stone just like the other one, and gets a cucumber, and it's just like, this is intolerable. Like, and it is the perceived injustice that leads him to get truly angry. Anyway, that is the point of the point that I think that is at the background of the connection that also Aristotle is trying to make. That's the end of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thanks for Professor Jimenez's fascinating talk. So now let's move to the Q&A. I think we must have a lot of questions. I think we will first take questions from our live audience from this classroom, and then if we have time, we'll move on to the online audience. Listeners, of course, can write your message in the message board or use hands up options, and then we will give you a mic later according to the order.
Yeah.
各位同学早上好。那么我们今天开始是周末小时2的课程。那么先也是测试一下设备，听得清的同学请扣1，听不见的同学。
I couldn't hear very well.
Hi, Marta, can you hear me? Okay, very good.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your fancy talk. I find this very interesting, especially your suggestion about this opposition between Aristotelian model of anger, justice, and Platonic reformative model. I actually have two questions connected to each other. First, because you talk about a lot about Aristotle's suggestion in politics, but you never really acknowledge Aristotle's analogy, namely between the politics, the political good, and the whole of the body. So when Aristotle talk about this, the political whole, and he would like to show there's a kind of civic priority. So I'm just wondering whether you model your interpretation of Aristotle's anger and justice can really contribute to this civic priority, namely the goodness of the whole political community. What I see from your talk, it's more like a kind of very modern picture, namely the individual against the individual. Then we try to find the kind of equality for this distributive justice. But I'm just wondering whether Aristotle has this as a kind of priority in our political good, or maybe we should think about how this kind of, and as you suggested, this Aristotelian model can really contribute to this, the political good as a whole. So this is one question. The second one connected to the first one, namely you try to make a distinction, especially following the Socrates case, the excessive anger can be very dangerous. And then you suggest for Aristotle, we need to have a modest anger. But the problem is how to make that differentiation between excessive and modest anger. What would be the criteria to have this kind of, it's not unusual when one sees the anger against another one, even wrongdoer, but still there's a kind of mutual or reciprocal coming back from the counterpart, namely there's no end to this kind of reciprocal anger against each other, right? So this is really not unusual. I guess this is probably one, at a certain point we have to stop this kind of the endless, reciprocity. And then the Aristotle like to, as you suggested, I don't see how Aristotle can really see at some point this reciprocal endless process can end. But the Platonic reformative model can show at some point one person has to stop and to think about reform the others, right? The inner harmony of his soul. And I think this is probably the reason why Plato doesn't, prefer this kind of anger model as you suggested. So this is the two questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Those are really good questions. So the first one, thank you for pointing that out. I don't want to make Aristotle look like a modern, and I am aware of the fact that he's like his political vision does have as a very central concern that the city should be organized for the sake of a common good, and that kind of like when things work well, people should be kind of like taking that into account. So, and that is that is an important concern of the way through. And it is true that the discussion of anger, the passages that I've mentioned, most of them tend to just present a very individualistic kind of reasoning for the motivations for motivations for anger, and then the the equality that is being aimed at might sound kind of like in a simplified way as an equality that is personal, just like you offended me, and I'm reacting then. There is a passage that might suggest the beginning of saving that perspective, or like as I'm making it more nuanced or complicating it a little bit. That is in the handout on page 3. On page 3 of the handout, the last quotation before 2C from Politics 5.2. 1302A38 to 1302B2, there where Aristotle adds that people sometimes react to pleonexia in others, not even when it affects them and it is about their own gain or their own recognition, but just even like as a reaction against the pleonexia of others per se. So I think that so the idea that people often are stirred up against one another by gain and by honor, not in order to acquire them for themselves, as we said earlier, but because they see other people grasping. So the fact that citizens might react against the graspingness of others, even if it doesn't affect them directly, it might be like the beginning of thinking about how the concern with equality is not just one personal one of like it has affected me directly and I react, but rather a concern with equality in the social context of like maintaining that kind of social balance as ultimately what the goal is, and that is at in the context of the politics. But I think, and this is a speculation, but I do think that it might be expandable to the way in which anger operates in general. So that it is true that the way in which it is described in the rhetoric, it tends to be just like a reaction to a slight that is a slight towards the person that gets angry, and yet it might be that the broad variety of examples that we get in the politics about how like the slights might be interpreted, etc., opens for the possibility of a more expansive understanding of the kinds of things that might produce that offense that are just like not so individualistic. But I think like I am grateful for the question, because it's something that needs to be kind of like highlighted and pushed against. And the other question is basically you're asking me who's better. This is like isn't Plato better? At least he ends with the words and the attack of one and like of people to one another. I think that Plato's solution is cutting with like, as you say, it's like it does solve the problem of the potential continuation of conflict by just like rechanneling the conflict into just certain transformations that might solve the problem or dissolve the problem. Now, Aristotle, I think, because it's concerned with the relevance of because it's concerned with the relevance of external goods in order to be able to exercise one's agency, is going to place some more resistance in the kind of just like forgiving and reforming attitude that might come out of the Platonic model. And that doesn't mean that is some kind of like that he's defending some kind of like cycle of vendetta. And in that regard, I think that it's important to maybe just, and that's why I kept that passage, despite the fact that it's long and at the end, maybe just people are tired already. But the passage from Politics 7:7, where he talks about how it is with friends that like we get offended, and that we have this kind of like angry reactions more clearly and maybe even more justified. It is with friends. I think that it might be opening a way of thinking that anger doesn't necessarily, despite the fact that is like even in the cases in which it's retributive, it doesn't need to be destructive. So it can just simply be a way of like calling attention to the other about the fact that questions about distribution do in fact matter. So that and calling attention to the fact that respecting each, like respecting the what is owed to each of us is going to be relevant in order for just like the living together being viable and harmonious. And and in that regard, just like I do think that the fact that he's talking there about just like how it is in the context of friends, when this happens, even in the most in the most extreme way, suggests that that the result is not necessarily one of like a continuing some reciprocal anger and vendetta, but rather one of like a signaling intentions and being ready, like really being ready to respond in a kind of like feisty way, so to speak, because like the alternative that he's seeing and the way in which he puts it in the Nicomachean Ethics is that otherwise one is kind of just like obligating one's will, so to speak. Those are not Aristotelian terms, but one is kind of like bending over in order to adapt to a system that is mistreating one. So that's kind of like the notion of slavish that he's using there. Does that help as kind of like at the beginning? I know that is more complex than that, but maybe the beginning of an answer can go that way.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
I don't think that camera is turned on to point forward. Where is it?
Hi.
I see you.
Cool. Awesome. I also have two short questions, more sort of elaborating on what you said. You mentioned that Aristotle says that sometimes if you're not angry, then you're servile or slavish. That seems to suggest to me that sometimes it's not just fitting or appropriate, but sort of obligatory to be angry. To not lack self-respect. And I'm wondering, so that's my first question, what do you think about that? Whether there's a case to be made for sort of stronger deontic notions when it comes to anger in these cases where sort of my self-respect is on the line. And the other question is, I was a bit surprised because a lot of modern authors who don't talk about ancient philosophy, who point out to the positive role of anger, they talk about anger's communicative function, and as opposed to mere revenge. And so this was kind of what I was expecting. And then you kind of pointed to this revenge point so ardently. And I'm also wondering, what do you think about that? Whether there's a case to be made for this sort of communicative function in anger in Aristotle. And to me, it seems the more you point to this revenge side, the more you have to stress this revolution, like, benefit of anger. Whereas the communicative thing is maybe more for modern politics, for sort of slight changes in society. So I'm wondering, what do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you. Those are two good points. And I know starting with the last question about the extremity of the position that I'm attributing to Aristotle. I think that that basically I'm trying to make sense of why he is not following the Platonic line, because Plato already has kind of backpedal in relation to retaliation, and he already has some kind of like new model, and Aristotle comes back and says like, embrace the old model, like revenge and all, and then I was wondering like why he might be embracing that revenge model instead of or accepting it. And it doesn't need to be that it doesn't need to be that ultimately like the virtuous person is kind of like acting under anger all the time, or just like it might be that it is simply like the readiness, which is connected to your first question. It's just like the having the readiness to do that, and the seeing it as important, like seeing that is important, the marking that questions about external conditions are relevant. So that one of the places that I see that is the motivation for Aristotle to to want to maintain the necessity of kind of stepping up whenever someone is just like stealing one from resources for agency is because by doing that they're diminishing the capacity of self-development, and just like and and in that regard there is there's a close connection between these considerations about the relevance of external conditions for one to be able to like develop the virtues and exercise the virtues, and be able to and when those things are when those conditions are kind of like diminished, Aristotle sees as justified. And as you say, as a kind of just like there's no, maybe not so much as duty as just like that is the only option, or like that is the option of just like kind of like exercising agency, because otherwise you're kind of like robbing yourself of just like being able to do anything. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to do with the question about the communicative aspect of anger in Aristotle, because he seems to make it so connected to like seeking that kind of like a result. And it might be that there is something of maybe the communicative aspect of it comes from the fact that in the definition that he talks about that there is a perceived slight, and then there's going to be also a perceived revenge, so that there has to be, there is, revenge in itself is not the goal. It's just like a revenge that is perceived by the other as such. So that in that regard, there is a conversation happening through the revenge in a way. Like there is a, like it's a way of making a point. It is and if the revenge or the retaliation would happen without the other person perceiving, then it wouldn't count. So in that regard, it's making the reparation that is producing is not just one at the level of like equalizing the goods that have been disequalized before, but also of just like calling attention to the fact that that's not okay, and like making it publicly, so to speak. And it also has to do with the fact that the slide itself also has that kind of like either public character or visible character, so that it is about like one, like the way in which one is perceiving the action of the other as offensive. So in that regard, yeah, like I think like I haven't thought a lot about like the connection between those two aspects, but I think that you could just like express the point about revenge in terms that is compatible and furthers the point about communication, but at the same time, I don't know, and maybe I'm being stubborn about this, but it seems to me that that like also the reparation at the level, not just at communication, but just like give me back my thing, give me the grape kind of thing, is relevant for Aristotle. So that even if like we think about the very simple case of the capuchin monkeys, even if there is some kind of understanding at some point of that one capuchin monkey gets to see that this is a trick or whatever, and it's not an offense because they were just doing an experiment, say, the capuchin monkey will be just like, yeah, but give me my grape. You're like the grape will be the point. The grape, giving me the grape will be the thing that like the relevance of the obtention of the external result. Is that convincing and responding to the question that you were asking in some way?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Me, I'm next. Okay. Thank you. I've got two questions, and I guess they're partly clarificatory. And the first one is that you paint Aristotle, especially with your slides and your pictures, to be a kind of defender or warrior for the oppressed with his story of anger. But I was wondering, so the question is, and this is maybe partly my ignorance, but I mean, what is the source of the kind of, so how does he describe this, the source of these judgments about inequality in the distribution of goods? And I was wondering, so how far is it appropriate to take him to be a defender of the oppressed? Especially, one might paint the picture that the thing that you've been saying about distribution and inequality to be a kind of, and the role of anger therein to be a kind of justification of anger and retribution against those who disrupt something like the status quo. So is his, I mean, if the source of the inequality or sort of a wrongful distribution of goods is something like, you know, what you might take to be the natural order of things, for instance, and he infamously says things about slaves. I think some of the things you said about slavery and the temperaments of slavery are actually kind of controversial. So it might be that, I mean, and he also infamously says things about women and their natural place in the order of things. So it looks like maybe this is a justification of anger against a slave who might have taken one of an owner's grapes, or a woman who's out of place in the society. So how far is this how far should we really put Aristotle to be a defender of the oppressed rather than something like a defender of something like private property? Yeah, so everything that you said, I think, might be consistent with him defending the appropriateness of anger in defense of private property rather than like defending workers who are unjustly taken to have what they've produced taken away from them. So that's the first question. And the second question.
I'm going to forget. Can I answer that question? And is it okay if I answer that question?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you, because it's a really good question, and you're totally right. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I'm giving the impression that Aristotle is on the side of the revolutionaries. Aristotle is very conservative, and he is, and the text. It might be tricky the way in which I'm appealing to this text about stasis and revolution. He is very much against revolution. So he is for stability until it cannot just be otherwise, and then just like changes had to happen. Okay, but even when things are not going so well, he would prefer he prefers stability over change, because of that is the way in which he's presenting things in book 5 of the politics. So you're right about, on the one hand, that kind of like a conservatism, and on the other hand, on him being on the wrong side of things when it comes to certain questions about places or people in the political sphere or in the political hierarchies. So it is not just controversial, it's horrendous the way in which Aristotle talks about, he makes a defense of the natural slave in the first book of the politics, when other people in his time were abolitionists. So it's not that there's not this well, there was the times of slavery, there were other people in his time that were abolitionists. So that there is Aristotle is on the wrong side of that when he could have been on the right side. And similarly in the question about women, that he doesn't even get to, Plato, at least in the Republic, has more reasonable positions, even if a lot of the things that Plato says in the Republic about marriage, etc., are also horrendous. But at least he does have a more moderate position about women's capacities, etc. And Aristotle does not. And the hierarchies that you're talking about, it's totally right to bring that up and to point that out. And it gives me the opportunity to clarify the sense in which I am appealing to Aristotle. That is not the one that he is advocating for, or he is making a connection between anger and social justice or anything like that, but rather that he does allow for us to make that connection in the context of his his theory of the the normativity of anger, and that his way of understanding the way in which anger is connected with our sense of justice and is connected with our sense of questions about distribution and recognition is insightful. and enables us to just like see that emotion as one that is as one that has that kind of a structure and that is reactive in those contexts. So that is the place in which I see the value of it. But I think that I think, and I might be wrong about this, but I think that that point can be independent from the fact that then the reasons, the ways in which he understands the kind of justice that anger will be reactive in that context, it might be very different than the one that we or I would prefer. And in the texts that I've given you, even in this selection from book 5, the way in which he talks about justice and the way in which he makes the connection is in his own terms, independent of whether the person is right or wrong about whether the thing itself is just or not. So the point is more about how the anger is about a perceived injustice, and that in that regard, the reaction, like the connection with revenge or the relevance of revenge or the appropriateness of revenge in the sense of like an attempt to balance things out back is one that is appropriate, or even as we were mentioning before, it might be even just like mandatory, or there's like a duty. But that but that again, that connection, I want to separate from, or like, and I think that he himself is separating from the appropriateness of the sense of justice that the person getting angry has. Now, of course, in the case of the virtuous person, they will have to have like the right sense of justice. Now, for Aristotle, like the way in which Aristotle understands that the right sense of justice might be one that, if it is connected to the presuppositions that he's making in the politics about hierarchies, etc., is one that we don't want to embrace or adopt. But in terms of like the formal structure of it, I think that it might be useful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. The formal structure. So can I just follow up on that then? Just,
yes, please.
Yeah. So so does he think that anger is virtuous in certain circumstances? Is this yeah? So I mean, the story about the slavishness. I mean, does he? I mean, if we connect that with his story about slaves. You might, so would he say that a slave can be virtuous when he becomes less like a slave and more like an angry person? Is that part of the way that he becomes more virtuous? If he perceives the fact that, you know, he has no goods and his owner even owns him, would the owner and with this class of people who do own slaves potentially perceive slaves as virtuous, at least in the sense of they're coming out of their slavishness by being angry? Would this be a consistent story?
It is in the sense in which he's talking about slavishness in the Nicomachean Ethics discussion of anger, it would be the slave who gets angry appropriately. Like the problem is the appropriately. Like the problem is the appropriately. And like and I see there might be a trap here that it might be this is what you're trying to get me to, that the trap is that it is not possible for the slave to get appropriately angry, because Aristotle has already established the conditions under which anger is appropriate. And then given the situation of the slave and the fact that they are by nature in the position in which they are, the anger will be inappropriate. Yeah, so like in connection to the way in which it is discussed, if we put together the way in which anger is discussed in the Nicomachean Ethics with those texts of Politics 1, in which like there is this kind of like a strict hierarchy established, and there are questions about like natural places for people, then they add limits to the, like, it would be inappropriate for a woman to get angry, or it would be inappropriate for a slave to get angry. Yeah. And exactly, and that's where you wanted me. So, so and that's and the point I was making is just like, yeah, that's horrible. Of course, like I'm not going to, I will be just bananas to go in a different direction. Yeah, that's a bad consequence. And yet the place in which the bad move is not located in the bad move is not located in the treatment of anger per se, but it is located in the ways in which appropriateness is limited by these hierarchical positions that he's establishing in the politics. So, and then the question is, and you might not like this, and you might be right about the fact that I cannot do this, but I think that I can say, I don't need to accept the hierarchies of the, I don't like it is, I can just like despise the hierarchies of the politics and yet think that there is something kind of like insightful about the way in which he's connecting the appropriateness of anger reactions with questions about justice.
Oh.
But that insight, the point I want to keep is that insight is right. The connection, that insight is right. That the connection between the reaction of anger and the questions about injustice is right. And then the further connection with not renouncing to the distributed character that justice, like that is connected to questions about distribution of material goods and recognition goods, is also relevant. Those are the things that I think that are insightful in the theory. And then if he has bizarre theories about how those recognition goods and those distributed goods ought to be distributed in the context of the politics, I just don't want to be responsible for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like you might think that I can't do that. Do you think that I can I do
that? Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah, I had a second question that I guess would
go ahead
to figure that out, but I think there are many other questions. So yeah.
Okay, so make it quickly, and I'll take the freedom of not responding to it. Maybe.
Well, I guess maybe a helpful thought is you have, if you can break down the structure of the role of anger in this story. So I thought of like a helpful schema. So some subject sort of sees that some action is wrong, and then he sees that some kind of reaction, psi, let's say, so the first action is phi, the second action is psi, is an appropriate response to that action. And then so it looks like from this sort of practical reason schema, you should do psi. I was wondering, so if Aristotle can fill out the role of anger in this kind of picture of a reasoning towards doing something, it looks, and I think you're fleshing that out with the structure of the role of anger in practical reasoning or in action, in more moral reasoning maybe. that you'd be able to do this. Because okay, so maybe, I'm not sure how helpful that is, but it looks like maybe that would push one to make very clear that there would be a role independent of the hierarchy stuff in book one. Yeah, so if the story is, but I wasn't really convinced by some of it. So the story about, well, it gives you a preparedness to action. I mean, if you just know how to react and what reaction is appropriate, then just do that. Where does anger come into play? I don't, is it that will help you jump to the right conclusion more quickly or something like that? I just didn't see how that's necessary, but maybe it is. Maybe the story about material goods and recognition of goods can fill that out. So I'm not totally sure how you can avoid the hierarchy problem and his views about potentially about justice. But I guess as long as you fill out where that role of anger is, that can be in something like a practical reason or moral reasoning or something like that, then you can do that. But yeah, if it's too tied to some of the things about justice, I think it becomes complicated because of book one stories, maybe. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's helpful.
Okay, I'll think about that. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. There are two questions that go more to the psychology side and to the politics side. So first, the connection between anger and justice seems to be rather tight on Aristotle's definition. Basically, it goes into the definition of anger to say that it's a response to injustice. So the first question is whether you think it is really appropriate and whether it is indeed the case in Aristotle, because in a sense we could also talk about anger at oneself. I can be angry at myself, and that does seem to be essentially connected to injustice. And in a sense, I think it's also possible to say that in many occasions when you are angry at others, it is somehow a projection of your anger at yourself. And so that's also something to consider. And the second question concerns the exact manner in which anger is connected to injustice. So basically, the question is how intellectual emotion is anger. Is it the case that anger is an emotional response that is somehow based on a prior recognition of injustice, sort of intellectual representation of an unjust state of affairs? Or is it rather the case that perhaps anger is in itself an emotional registration of an unjust state of affairs that is independent of intellectual registration? So thank you very much.
Thank you. About the first question, I think I forgot the question because I was too focused on something that you said that I don't think that is the case in Aristotle. So I don't think that in Aristotle, because of the way the notion of anger may be more limited than the way in which we talk about anger. I don't think that anger at oneself is possible. So that anger, because the kind of like the cause of anger is always the perceived slight, the perceived offense. So in that regard, in that regard, it's like he does not talk about anger at oneself, and I don't see, and maybe maybe I'm being too narrow in the ways in which we relate to ourselves, but it seems to me that so Plato thinks that anger at oneself is possible in public form. Yes, yes, the self-directed anger. In the rhetoric, the way in which the anger is constructed is always focused on this kind of like a response to a perceived slight. So there is doesn't seem to be space for that. So that might be something that is different, or maybe he doesn't give the whole. He's not giving. Either he's narrowing it excessively, or but it seems that that anger is like has that structure of like being connected to that, to like being caused by the perceived slight. And in that regard, here, let me find again. I'm going to put the definition. Like, I know that you have the definition. On account of perceived slight at the hands of someone who has no call to slight oneself or one's friends. So, yeah. Here, so here, if we look at this, I don't really see the space for that, like self-directed anger. Can you say something about this so that it's not just, I don't feel crazy? What do you think about that? So do you think that in the space of this, even if he doesn't talk about the self-directed anger, like would this conception of anger have a space for the description that you were talking about before?
I was skeptical, so that's the reason why I
okay, so you like, and what you were saying is that you're skeptical about that notion because it doesn't have a space for those examples.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that it doesn't have a space for those examples, and yeah, that is, but that is the Aristotelian definition. So it's just like so you're saying then let's just like do away with this, or like we gotta do something with Aristotle's definition. There's this problem that it doesn't incorporate these cases of anger at oneself. Good. Yeah, I hear that. I don't know what else to do with it. What do you think that follows from there? I think you're right. It doesn't incorporate that.
Well, it was just a concern about how properly to define or to think of anger, whether it is really proper to tie it so closely to justice, or whether one should rather differentiate between different kinds of anger. Maybe there is a more social variety of anger that is essentially justice related, and maybe there is another variety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and in that, I mean, if we do that, then the whole thing is safe in the sense that then you can be just like, well, there are other kinds of anger that are not going to be connected to justice because they have like they're self-directed, or they are not related to slights. So you can give me examples of things that we call anger that might not even be related to, like, it's narrow not only because of this example of self-related anger, but also because like there might be some modern examples of anger that are not about slights. It's not about an offense, or it's not about, like a I haven't thought a lot about those because I'm obsessed with the other ones, but I'm sure that there can be many. And then I don't know, like I know people who get angry at things that, like, you know, like I have a good friend who gets angry things that you do involuntarily. And it's just like, if the other person wasn't intending to do it, like, I don't understand how this can be a reason for anger. So that that is inappropriate anger. What am I gonna say? So I think that like there are cases like people get angry like that. And what Aristotle is going to say, not that I agree with everything that he's gonna say about that, but I can see that it's not completely unreasonable to say, well, like that is anger at oneself is like an inappropriate anger. It's just kind of like a non-fitting anger. Like you're feeling the feeling, but it is kind of like coming out in the wrong way. And you don't like, I see that that's something that you want to resist. You're gonna say that you want to say that there are some cases of those angers that are fitting. And I mean, the previous question about self-respect might be a way of connecting with what someone said when Lee is commenting on the chat that Plato thinks that anger at oneself is possible in Republic 4. So we do have example of like a of someone like doing something inconvenient in the wrong moment and then getting angry at themselves for having done that, or like someone not defending their territory properly, like not defending their cause properly in the right moment, and then like getting angry at themselves for having done that. And there would be some kind of in a way, like Republic 4 is an interesting place to talk exactly about this, because Republic 4 is the place in which like Plato's using exactly those kinds of examples to argue for a division of the soul, so that you need some kind of otherness in order to generate that kind of anger. So in a way, that would give us some kind of like route to characterize cases of self-anger as like cases in which like one part of self is annoyed about another part of self. But of course, like Aristotle either in the rhetoric or in the Nicomachean ethics treatment of good temper, or in the passage of the Politics that I'm talking about, has no consideration of any of those examples. I think that you're right that it is interesting to complicate the definition by kind of like trying to think about how those examples would fit or not within the definition. And I'm not sure whether the conclusion would be that it cannot absorb many of the examples, or it would be that it would kind of like deal it in the way that in which I was saying before, that it's just like, well, he's going to end up saying that some of these angry reactions are just like inappropriate, but nonetheless, like they have something in common with anger, or he can just like redescribe them as just like using the kind of separation of self strategy. Yeah. And in relation to your second question, sorry, I went on in this. You all have two questions, and it's very difficult to keep it straight because I just get entangled in answering the first question, and then I forget the second one. Here,
the relation between the emotion response and the intellectual recognition of unjust benefits. So between.
Oh yeah, that was a really good question. I have it here. That is a really good question. I'm again going back to what we have, that like in the text, that maybe just like the best place to go is the best place to go to answer this question is again the definition. Anger is defined as a desire accompanied by pain for a perceived revenge. So it seems that anger is a response to on account of a perceived slight. So it's a response to the perceived slight. So there is a prior recognition of injustice to which anger is a response. And yet, I do think that your suggestion and this distinction that you're just kind of like presenting as two ways of seeing what it could be, I do think that Aristotle might slide between the one and the other. So despite the fact that the definition suggests that anger is a response to a prior perception of injustice, in some occasions, it might be like in some of the examples that he gives about like the description of the pain that the slide causes, like that pain itself caused by the slide might be already the perception of the injustice itself. Now, insofar, in the definition of anger, he doesn't describe it as a kind of pain, but rather as a desire that is based on that perception or on the perceived slide, is caused by it. It seems that the emotional response to a prior perception is the characterization that he's using. Is that better or worse in your opinion?
Certainly better, thank you. Yes, we are already actually running out of time, but could we please leave one last question to the online audience?
Yes.
Very briefly.
李文琪，对，他能说话吗？让他说话。
Could you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Jimenez. Actually, I also have two questions, which is really a coincidence. And I think the first question I've already typed it on the chat. And the first question is that you did not take into consideration Aristotle's physiological definition of anger depicted in The Anima, Book 1, Chapter 1, where he combines both the opinions of dialecticians who think that anger is a desire for revenge. And this definition is very similar to the definition that you provide from the rhetoric. And Aristotle also thinks that this view of the dialecticians show the form of anger, and the opinions of natural philosophers who think anger is a boiling of the blood and hot stuff around the heart. And this opinion, Aristotle thinks, show the matter of anger. So could you give us some more explanation of why you did not include the physiological elements of the definition of anger in your talk? And do you think that the physiological element of anger does not matter in terms of anger's relation to retaliation or more general to justice? This is my first question. And my second question is a clarifying question, which is about the understanding of the perceived revenge, timorias phenomenes, and the perceived slight. So what is your position on the term phenomenes? Do you think that phenomenes in this context refers just to what the agent takes to be revenge or slight? Or do you think it refers to something that has a physiological root? For example, the perceived plight is caused by the agent's fantasia, which judges some action or behavior as slight. Now, these are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those questions. Both of them very interesting. Let me start with the last one, since the first one is written there. And they are connected, I think. So I do think that the two senses that you have mentioned might be connected, of perceived. I thought that it was going to be more of a trick question because there is a dispute about what the perceived, like in some translations in English, perceived is translated as conspicuous, and it has like some translators and some interpreters want to connect it more with like it having some kind of like public dimension or something like that. And I do want to I think that I am on the side that wants to interpret that in a narrower way, as like perceived in the sense of like the fact that both the angry person and the person that they're angry with are aware of what's going, like they are aware of this light, and they're aware that they will have to be aware of the revenge that is being sought for is one that of which the the receiver is going to be aware. So it's just like is more limited in that sense, and it I think that does not necessarily exclude the kind of dimension that you suggested of it being that it is on the eyes of the subject, or on the eyes of the agent, that that this is a slight. So that it's not necessarily a slight objectively taken, but it is just like the agent perceives it as a slight, and that is why they do have this they do have the angry reaction. So like perceived like has that kind of like aspect or dimension too. But I do think that that's not necessarily disconnected or unrelated to the fact that that it is going to be through kind of like sense perception and fantasy, and just like and those kind of like a physiological sources of like a producing perception that is going to be construed. So does that answer that question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Also, like
I think, yeah. My first confusion of this question is that taking fantasia as a technical term, which refers to actually the capacity of the soul, the function, the capacity of the soul, which is not perception, but comes after our perceptions.
No. Okay. No, that is too strong. That is just like, I think that the term is more of a common term that is just like one that they're aware of. So it's not referring to anything technical about like it being related to fantasia specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then connect like in relation to your first question, why didn't I bring it up? I don't really know at this point what to do with it. So that's kind of like the short answer to why I didn't bring it up. Do I think that it might be relevant? I do think, and this is connected to the question that the previous person was asking about whether anger is a response to a recognition of injustice that happens first, or it is itself in part at least a recognition of the injustice. That this description of the physiology, the physiologist might be relevant in the sense that like it can be that the physiological description of anger or the side of anger gives us some tools to understand it as some kind of like bodily reaction to this perception of injustice that kind of like colors it in a way, so that it is in a way is connected to the perception of something that like makes it a perception of something that is anger worthy or something like that, so that the bodily reaction would accompany the perception in a way that would be kind of like what is part of the becoming angry. And that kind of story is one that also we have in more contemporary accounts of like how emotions occur. I think that is what like the previous person I think was more interested in, how Aristotle relates to those, and he's preoccupied on those questions of priority, and then like this question about like what the place of this account of the physiologist is going to have in kind of like bringing out the different aspects of what anger is, and that kind of like a how the mechanism of anger works is going to be relevant. So it's not that I didn't include it because I don't think it's relevant, and this distinction is important. Now, I didn't really go into any of those into the details of the previous question about whether anger is the perception or is produced by the perception, and these other questions. But I do think that if we want to kind of like get a clearer sense of the details of how Aristotle is thinking about that, that would be a good thing to include and deliberate. And I will in the better version of this paper that will come after this talk. So thank you for those questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we are already running out of time. But before closing this section, let me make announcements which may be related to some of question in the Q&A, because one of our forthcoming Friday lecture is Aristotle on women. So now I'd like to thank everyone for attention, for sharing your idea. Let us join me to thank Professor Jimenez again and for your wonderful, fascinating lecture.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions. It was very fun.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Marta. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Good, perfect. Thank you. Have a good rest of your Saturday. And thank you all for coming on Saturday. Bye, thanks.
Bye-bye. Yeah.